original campaign kicked off at the Washington Convention Center hosted by Mayor Marion Barry. He was a believer and a fighter for civil rights. And I'm not going to talk about the government having spent $40 million and bringing drugs and dressing up a girlfriend to entrap him. That's another day. God bless him. And if you have a substance issue, you need help. You don't need incarceration. God bless the soul of Marion Barry. This past week, my father went to Portland, Oregon, and met with the board of Microsoft at our upcoming Wall Street project. The CEO, the past CEO, Mr. Ballmer, said that he would be in attendance this coming year in New York City for the Wall Street project. We have to have solutions to our problem, opening up the doors for high tech. Our children are ready, our parents are ready, our workforce is ready. We need access to jobs now. I would like to dedicate my remarks today to the mothers, the widows, the fathers, the brothers, the sisters, the sons, the daughters of all of these Americans killed by the police. Killed by the police. I couldn't help but think about Mr. Eric Garner, and I was wondering, what could he have done different? Our president says that we may need body cameras on our law enforcement officials. This was recorded in high def, 1080i, panorama view. Now that we've seen it, are we going to archive this, study it, compile it, or is it time to move on it? Next thing they're going to tell you after the cameras is that you needed some mirrors. After the cameras and the mirrors, they're going to say the lighting wasn't right and the audio wasn't there. We can do better than this. This was a miscarriage. And I want to say I'm proud to be an American. The children that came out on the streets all around America, they came out in the richest neighborhoods of America. Young white children from prominent universities left their dorm rooms knowing that they were American citizens, saw a gross misjustice and injustice, and did something. And I want to put a challenge out to our community. Let's join the freedom fight. Children in Japan came up and stood up. I was so proud. It didn't happen in Roseland in Chicago, not in Grand Crossing or on West on Madison Avenue. We've had 36 police murders of civilians in Chicago last year, 34 this year. And the way it goes is you call after you've been assaulted, the phone goes to the police station, the detectives come out, then they refer you to an inquiry inside the police department that goes to an independent police review board next to the police department that's appointed by the mayor, that then goes to the chief of the police, the superintendent, that goes to a board to recommend disciplining the police, and then they find out in the last 4 years of 176 people that have sustained death by police in the city of Chicago, only 3 have been found to have murdered the individual, and nothing ever happens. Why am I so concerned about this, ladies and gentlemen? And it's a multifaceted problem. And the issue I'm going to deal with today is institutional oppression and what we can do about it. I know our friend and our brother, the president, has a lot on his desk. But I've had the opportunity these last couple of days and weeks to think about something very specific and concrete. If I could have his ears, that I would share with him. When we talk about institutional oppression, it is a multifaceted problem. We're talking about in the book of Isaiah, 10th chapter, 1st verse, if you want to look it up. It's in the book. Thank you for my Bible, Uncle Saint. You have to talk about what keeps people poor. One part of poverty, you can get put into poverty faster than any other way. First, when you've been robbed. And you come home and look in there and you got back from here and you have no items, you've been robbed. You can be poor. You can have low and no skills and can't find anything where someone's willing to exchange your time, your effort for any capital. You can be indolent. Just see what comes and sit on somebody's sofa and eat what's in the refrigerator and what's left. Or you can get up and go to work every day and still not have enough money, that you've been nickeled and dimed and you've been robbed in a very sophisticated fashion. And this is what I mean by the institutionalization of poverty. We know you need personal salvation, but I'm talking about the social salvation that Jesus wanted to change for institutions. I'm talking about where the people that can write, that are literate, that know the law, that make the law, the people that create the law firms of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. I'm talking about the people that install the camera lights and then put a monitoring fee on it and then reduce the yellow light from 3 seconds to 2.9 seconds, that tag your car, that double the fine, then put the boot on your car, then tow your car, then sell your car, and leave you with the note on the car. Institutionalizing poverty, where you can't work your way out of it. That is the crime of our time, where you have too much weak at the end of your money. Now there's strange fruit all across the streets of America. When we look at our housing policies, our lending practices, zoning laws, contract compliance, look at our health care access. I'm not talking about having been mandated to buy insurance, but who will now accept it and service me now that I have it? I'm talking about education policy. I'm talking about transit systems, jobs, and who has access to proper food and nutrition, crime and who pays for crime, who's overly persecuted and prosecuted. We're talking about the creation of political districts, talking about the voting laws and disenfranchisement. When we look at lending practices, the law is on the book. The law is on the book. If you are a U.S. financial institution that has a banking license, like American Express, like Morgan Stanley, during the height of the crisis, these investment banks were giving and this credit card company a banking license. What does that mean? I'm glad you asked. If you put $1 in equity in your bank, you not only need to keep 8 cents in the drawer, you can in turn lend out 12 times that amount. So if you have $1 million of equity in your bank, you have the lending power of $12 million. If you have $1 billion in your bank, you have the lending power of $12 billion. These institutions were giving the privilege of having United States banking license, but have not had to comply with the law to become depository institutions so we can have access to lending and investing in our neighborhood. Housing policy, sundown towns. To know that Mr. Dick Gregory, the Honorable Dick Gregory, and the Honorable Maxine Waters grew up in the adjoining town, neighboring town to Ferguson, Missouri. Sometimes you have to understand where people come from so you'll understand why they fight for the rest of their life. In this St. Louis County, Missouri, it's a unique place, as I've observed it, of 91 municipalities, 91. So as soon as one group of blacks move in, the whites quickly move out, and then they zone it, recreate it, put another road through it, take the tax base, segregate the schools, and this is the pattern of St. Louis County. Culturally, we know that Jesse James comes out of Missouri. Culturally, we know that Brother Dred Scott got put back into slavery in Missouri. He's only buried 4 miles away from there in Calvary Cemetery. And Jesse James was born and raised around, he hung out around Little Dixie about an hour and 40 minutes just west of there. So we see the spirit still echoing in American history of those that long and yearn to breathe free, that have a cross of Calvary on their back, while a bloodthirsty Barabbas is able to run free and is mythologized and act like Jesse James has done something good in American history. He was a robber, a murderer, a border ruffian. He was a slave catcher by trade. And they make songs about Jesse James. We've got dueling spirits in this country, but the zoning laws, we've had sundown towns in this country. What's a sundown town? The person that created Tarzan, for example, very successful television program. You get to see a Caucasian man wrestle alligators. You get to see beautiful Jane with Tarzan. And you get to see Africans afraid of lions and can't do, and he has to educate everyone. It was racist to its core. Well, he comes from Oak Park, Illinois, the creator of Tarzan. Then he moved to Los Angeles and became so wealthy. He created a town on the other side of LA in the county next to Encino called Tarzana, is the town he created. And that was one of many towns that was a sundown town. And how that works is before sundown happens, you better be out of town. So long after the law is removed, the spirit of that law stays on. We know there's the spirit of a sundown town still around. So even in Ferguson, Missouri, the neighboring town that Dick Gregory and the Honorable Maxine Waters grew up in, Ferguson used to be a sundown town. In the 1970s, it had 1% African Americans in Ferguson. They used to close the road off and lock the gates at night for the main thoroughfare into Ferguson, but they had a back road for the housekeepers and the servants to leave to go to the neighboring town. A sundown town created by zoning law. And the way this works is a white minister, bless his heart, wanted to help an African-American engineer buy a house in Ferguson because he did not want to stay in a cramped ghetto environment, overcrowded and substandard schools. So he became a straw purchaser. Yes, this minister did. So that his good friend could buy a house in Ferguson because they would not sell it to the African-American man, but they would sell it to him. So he bought it, gave it to him, and then within a week or so, the man said 30 signs started going up, houses for sale. He said when he first moved in the town, the police used to come by there. He didn't know if they were coming to keep the streets safe, if they were coming to look at him. But he said there was parks and recreations and services. The streets were swept frequently. And now he says his street has none of those services and people come and abandon cars on his block. The people left that town and moved to the next town over. So you can see 70% in 1970, 1% of the town was African American. By the 80s on the census tract, it was 10%. All the way up until 2010, now it's 67%. People have left the town, zoned into a new area, started a new school district, started another policing force, and have left all the liabilities and expenses behind. Poverty has grown in the last decade in Ferguson, Missouri. The unemployment has shot up. Able-bodied people ready to work. Contract compliance, it's on the books. But we can't have laws simply that are legislated in and then regulated out because of manipulation. Healthcare access, we all have to pay. But for doctors now to say we don't accept the Affordable Care Act insurance, well, you've got to have some power behind making someone accept what you have to pay for. It's wrong. When we look at education policy, Mr. Arne Duncan arbitrarily has changed the Student Plus Loan Program. There is a dorm on Morehouse's campus that is empty because the same children that qualified 2 years ago don't qualify today because the lending criteria has changed. That's wrong. We used to look back 90 days on a student's and a family's qualifications for their ability and their probity in order to pay. He went back 5 years. He went back pre the crisis. 2 justice systems. When the banks needed help, laws were suspended with all post, haste, speed, alacrity, regardless of their need, they were given assistance. All we're simply saying, you owe that to the American people as well. People aren't poor because they're not working. People are poor because they're not given a fair chance and a fair shot and fair terms. Transit systems. The link between welfare and work, ladies and gentlemen. Class will be out in 15 minutes. The link between welfare and work oftentimes is transportation. In the city of Chicago, like Ferguson, if you see a crowd of people on the bus stop, like on 79th in the Dan Ryan, okay. Well, I don't know. Some people are missing it. If there are enough people at the bus stop to fill up one bus, that means you're in a transit desert. That means your buses aren't coming at the appropriate time. If it takes you more than 15 minutes for you to receive a bus, you do not have mass transit. That is called scheduled service. Let me say it another way. If you can order Jimmy John's faster than you can see a bus coming down the block, you do not have mass transit. Jobs. And make one other point. There is no profitable mass transit system in the world. All mass transit systems are subsidized. So when our Chicago Transit Authority goes to Evanston, Illinois, to Skokie, Illinois, to Berwyn, Illinois, to River Forest, Illinois, and you pass stops on the west side, that's not racial profiling, that's racism in transit practices. On another day, we can talk about racial profiling because I'm just about racially profiled out. I don't know what it is. Is that a look? Is that a style? I know what racism is. and we have to call it by its name. These sanitized clinical words that absolutely mean nothing. Take a position. Are you hot or cold? Don't be lukewarm. Take a stand. If the young man is wrong, say it. If the police is wrong, look them in the face and say it. Crime and punishment. We can't have 2.3 million people incarcerated in our country, with 1 million African Americans languishing behind these bars. We cannot see that our children are now getting expelled in preschool. Our young ladies are getting incarcerated 4 and 5 times the rate. For God's sake, they're children. These are children. When you hear about a 12-year-old child killed in Cleveland. I was talking the other day with someone about Eric Garner, and someone said about the case, and I said, yes, I know Garner is horrible. And we were talking, and we were disagreeing, and I said, well, hold on, what are you talking about? They said, another one just happened. And another one just happened. This is not a local problem. This is an epidemic and a plague. The United Nations has asked to see the full report by United States senators on our crime and punishment practices. Ladies and gentlemen, our country has a problem. The world is watching us. Part of what makes America great, part of what makes America great is that we have been given a moral mantle because we theoretically say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We have been given a mantle. We've been given a mantle, but we're dropping it. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do better than this. In conclusion, I'm going to share with you what is it that we can do about it. If I had the president's ear, I would say respectfully, Mr. President, I don't want a can of beer. I don't want a bottle of wine. I don't want any gin and juice. I want to talk about justice. When Officer Crawley took Skip Gates out of his house and arrested him, you were right. Crawley was wrong. Let's stand up and tell them that was wrong. He was a sergeant, but there was a black sergeant right there with him who said nothing like a coward. When you see all these officers swarming around to choke the life out of Mr. Eric Garner, oh, they bad in a pack, jumping up on his back. Yeah, you bad. And the little cowardice officer that choked the life out of him, following Mayor Giuliani's practices of what's that law he got on broken glass theory of law. He's racked up 257 cases in the last 7 years trying to charge people criminally, and they get thrown out. Just a harassing sort of guy, and has 2 open court cases on violating people's civil rights. I believe in law enforcement, but the grand jury is not the jury. Take it to court. Stop the veil of secrecy. It's everyone's business. When those men were choking the life out of him, what you did not see was that the sergeant on duty was an African-American female. I have to say this because when I see the young white children all across America rising up with a level of self-righteous indignation, walking and marching for Mr. Eric Garner, walking and marching with Trayvon Martin, walking and marching with Mr. Brown, they sense a sense of indignation. They know they're Americans, and if it can happen to them and you, it can happen to me and the rest of us. So what are you waiting on? What can the president do? We don't need cameras, although they can be effective. But what are we going to do about this camera that we just saw? Here's what I would recommend. If you recall, after the events of 9/11, President Bush called the cabinet together, and he, by executive order, created Homeland Security, made it a cabinet-level position. By executive order, I've been to the Oval Office several times. At that desk in the right-hand drawer on the top is a stack of pens. In the Constitution, the president is given the privilege and the power of executive order. Our president is the chief executive of our nation. He is the first commander-in-chief of the armed services, given the obligation to enforce the law. So what is the purpose of executive orders? It's to bring agencies together to enforce the law. You can't create it, that's a legislative function. But you can enforce the law. I would say, Mr. President, let's ask the Center for Disease Control to come up here. These just aren't crimes and homicides. There's also a pathology and a mental sickness on people that are killing these children. On who says with a gun and a car, I was afraid of a big black man. You got a gun, you're trained. How can you be afraid? You got a radio. If you're too scared, get out the job. I'd say, Mr. President, now that we've created health and the Center for Disease Control that can come here and we can quarantine these areas. Let's bring in the epidemiologists. Let's go to the source where people are in pain so we can bring all of the government's resources. Then I would say, let's go to Health and Human Services. Let's give some exams and find out what is their nutritional level. Were there some young people in here born from a woman that gave her child fetal alcohol syndrome? The woman was still partying. Baby's brain is malnourished. There are vitamins that can restore your cognitive abilities if you catch it in time. Let's bring the solutions down to the people. Let's go into Homeland Security. I went on the website last night and looked at the mission statement of Homeland Security to defend us from terrorists abroad. All you have to do is add one more sentence to the second sentence in the mission statement, and we will also protect citizens of America at home from government officials that have the sworn obligation to serve and protect and not kill them. Let's have the federal government investigate this. I would go over to the Department of Justice with that executive order of a pen. It's on the book. Banks that have received money, you have to, by contract compliance, have minorities on your board. You have to invest in the neighborhoods where you've taken the money from. I would go by the Department of Agriculture. Why can't we create some nutritional food programs? We give food away all around the world. Get that executive pen Let's make it happen. Go to the Department of Education. After I asked Mr. Arnie Duncan for his resignation, I would have real educational reform and policies. Our children aren't deficient, it's just that the